government. I think it's going to be a continuing trend. I think it's going to get a lot worse. And I think we need to have a thorough re-examination not only of foreign policy, but also migrant policy. I think one way or the other, a lot of this lands on Mrs. Merkel's shoulders. And I can say one other thing as an American. Remember, we've had these attacks here in the United States, obviously of the Islamic variety, but maybe we'll start getting these other attacks as well. Here, when they occur, everybody always wants to talk about guns. Let's remember, in Europe, gun controls are much, much stricter than they could ever imagine to be here in the United States, and it doesn't seem to be doing them much good, does it?
Well, people across the globe have been paying their condolences to the victims of the Munich shooting. U.S. President Barack Obama also reflected on the tragedy and pledged America's full support to Germany before trying to lighten the situation with a quick quip. Take a listen.
There were shootings in Germany, and we don't yet know exactly what's happening there, but obviously our hearts go out to those who may have been injured. It's still an active situation, and Germany is one of our closest allies, so we are going to pledge all the support that they may need in dealing with these circumstances. It's a good reminder of something that I've said over the last couple of weeks, which is our way of life, our freedoms, our ability to go about our business every day, raising our kids and seeing them grow up and graduate from high school and now about to leave their dad. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little too personal. Getting a little too personal there.
So Obama's speech attracted criticism on Twitter. Many people said that they were embarrassed by his words, while others reacted angrily. And some just resorted to poking fun at the American president, comparing him to Nero. We spoke with Michael Ratty, an editor at BS News. He thinks that Europe will be plagued by terror until it changes its foreign policy.
In terms of, there will be pressure on the public to do something, from the public on their governments to do something, and that will tend to be fairly reactionary, sadly. It will mean maybe putting up borders, and whereas Europe is fairly relaxed now, you can cross borders across Europe, apart from the UK, of course, but from France into Germany, that may all change, and there might be pressure from the public to actually change that. I don't think it will make any difference, to be honest. I think that would-be terrorists, if they are would-be terrorists, they would get across borders quite easily. We know this has happened, but obviously homegrown terrorists, like we allegedly had in London in 7/7, they didn't need to cross borders. They didn't need a passport. They were already here. So I think the most effective way to stop terrorism is to stop participating in it and to stop arming those that would be terrorists. It's an ideological battle that we're facing, and we're on the wrong side of it. The governments of European countries are fighting the bad war. Let's put it that way. It seems like all of these things have become almost predictable. You can almost set your watch by terrorist attacks in Europe at present, and that is a horrendous state of affairs that we've come to. But I honestly don't see any European or UK or US government actually genuinely interested in stopping terrorism. If they were, there's a really simple suggestion. They could just stop carrying out acts of terrorism themselves. Less than 48 hours after the Nice attack, the French Air Force bombed Syria. They weren't there under any kind of UN mandate. They weren't invited by the genuine Syrian government, and yet they bombed a town in northern Syria, killing 120 civilians, many of them children. That's terrorism, isn't it? That's state terrorism, though. And not just a direct link with foreign policy. It's not just a case of our actions abroad cause the young people to be radicalised and take matters into their own hands and commit acts of terror back in Europe. But we are European governments and their Gulf monarchy allies and Turkey and the US. We are arming and facilitating terrorism within Syria, within Iraq, within Afghanistan. The war on terror, as we've said before on this show, is a war of terror. It's not on terror, it's of terror.
We heard from Henrik Palmgren, host of Rebels Radio. He is concerned that the wave of terrorism will spread to Northern Europe all too soon.
The situation in Munich that's developing right now could even be part of the same pattern that we've seen. So it is true to a certain extent that multiculturalism is harmful. But it's the same thing here. We don't know who is behind these stickers. It's been blamed on you know, so-called neo-Nazis. But it could be anybody. It could be the opposition that basically is trying to show how intolerant we are as Swedes and show how racist we are. And they can use these kinds of you know, propaganda pieces, stickers like this, to their favor. So we have to be very wary of letting these kinds of, you know, small stickers and posters and propaganda infomercials to kind of push us in one direction or another. I believe that we're going to definitely see some kind of terrorist attacks in Sweden in the near future. It's definitely not out of the picture. I think, you know, Sweden is in a very vulnerable situation because we have taken in so many migrants, more per capita than any other country. And we don't know who these people are. We don't know what countries they come from in some cases. They might throw away their passport. And this is very dangerous. I mean, this is a real danger to the people of Sweden. And we can have a mass casualty event in Sweden like we've had it in so many other European countries. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just a matter of time before something like this happens, unfortunately. But this, again, this is the fruits of multiculturalism and wide open European borders with an elite and an establishment that doesn't protect the native European population anymore. I do believe that the next thing we're going to see much more of is unfortunately these sexual assaults and rape attacks. They're just going to continue, unfortunately. And something has to be done about this. I mean, our establishment, our government, our authorities in Sweden have to recognize that this is a problem, but they've abdicated their legal contract, if you will, with the people of taking care of them. We're getting, for example, the mayor, and this is happening in other European countries. For example, the mayor or one of the PMs out of Nice said that basically we have to adapt and adjust to these new circumstances. Same things have been voiced by Swedish politicians that, oh, these are just the new conditions. I think we heard something similar out of Munich. Again, we don't have all the details about that, but they basically said these are new conditions in Europe and we have to adjust and adapt to these conditions. This is absolutely horrible that they're not thinking about the security of the native European population. So this is something that has to change. And as they get more backlash, as mainstream politicians and the media get backlash for lying about these kinds of events and not telling the truth, you're going to see opposition to this rise within the country. And hence you're going to get a rhetoric which is basically fearful from the opposition, where they say that neo-Nazism, fascism, and all these kinds of things are on the rise in Europe. But the reality is that it's actually a population which is scared for their life, justifiably so, considering how many people has died now in Nice and in Brussels and in Paris. And these attacks are just continuing. It's becoming almost a daily, on a daily basis now. This is insane. The politicians has to do something about this. I mean, this is not rocket science. They know how to stop these things if they wanted to. They have to get control over the borders and to make sure that the population that are within the country is safe until we can control organizations like ISIS, who have used its vulnerability to penetrate into Europe to now perform these attacks. We saw in Germany.
Ortiz, Peter Oliver has been closely following developments in Germany following the shooting.
Well, right now we are really seeing the words of the Munich police force echoed in reality. They said that this was a cautious all clear, and as you can see behind me, things are pretty much normal. It's you know, the early hours of the morning here on a Saturday morning. Traffic is now moving freely. However, earlier on Saturday morning and late Friday evening, this whole area was on complete lockdown. Where I'm stood, there was a police officer holding an assault rifle. There was stopping all traffic from moving in one direction. The only cars that we were seeing on this side of the road over to my right had blue lights flashing. We're about 500 meters or so away from where the where the shopping mall is, where the shooting took place. The shopping mall itself is still obviously an active crime scene and is under extreme investigation and scrutiny and on lockdown itself. But that lockdown spread further away when, as we understood it, there may have been more shooters, that we thought there was a manhunt underway, or at least a potential manhunt. We've now heard from the police saying that the body they found around a kilometre away from the scene, as they understand it, is the body of the shooter, the lone shooter who carried out this attack. Now, we're starting to find out more about just who this person was. However, one thing we don't know is what their motive was. Police have released information saying he was an 18-year-old Iranian-German citizen. But what we've heard from the scene videos that were taken on people's mobile phones appear to show him shouting a number of things, none of which gives us a real clear impression of just what his motive would have been. On Saturday, we're going to hear from the German Chancellor. She's going to be chairing a crisis meeting up in Berlin. Also, the Interior Minister is heading here to Munich, as we try and piece together exactly what was behind this attack, which has left 9 people dead, 10 including the man police believe was the sole shooter.
All right, in this video filmed in Munich, you can see people holding their hands up on police orders. Similar scenes were witnessed in Nice last week when people were escorted by security forces with their hands on their heads after a truck sped into crowds, killing scores there. We spoke to experts who think the recent attacks will result in increased security measures, which will infringe on the public's rights and privacy.
What will happen is we're going to have changes. We're going to have an increase in the invasion of our privacy, particularly in public places where the expectation is lower. But we're also going to see changes in technology. And one thing that I will say is that in countries throughout Europe where we have millions upon millions of people, if you see some kind of unusual behavior, report it immediately. Let the authorities sort it out. One of the things that the German police are very good at is responding to these attacks very quickly. But the other thing that people don't realize in much of the West, that even if you go to a new residence, an apartment or a home, you have to register with the government. So already there are significant incursions upon people's right to privacy, and that's going to continue both in the virtual world and in the physical terrestrial world as well. And I think we'll see greater use of technology too. But unfortunately, this is going to continue, and we will see a greater increase in the invasion on our civil liberties.
I really don't see how law enforcement could prevent these kinds of attacks. And frankly, law enforcement doesn't get enough credit for when they do successfully defend their country. Take France. You know, the UEFA soccer games were a very juicy target for Islamic State. And France deployed tons of security. I was in France during the UEFA games, and there was security absolutely everywhere. They really couldn't have had any more security, but I don't think that that type of security is sustainable in the long term, especially for a liberal democracy, because they've had to suspend all sorts of, you know, freedoms. So it's going to be, there's going to continue to be terrorist attacks like these, insofar as there are individuals who want to commit them, regardless really of what governments do.
All right, 9 victims dead, 1 gunman reportedly committed suicide, and 16 people injured. I'll be joined by Daniel Hawkins here in the studio in just a couple of minutes. You're watching RT International. Stay with us.
Responsible employers, social security, proper working hours, full salary. In European companies, this is not as typical as you might think.
Fazemos horas. E por semana, 50, cheguei a fazer 80 horas.
80 horas. Mensen zijn bang om met ons te praten, mensen zijn bang om hun gegevens, mensen zijn gewoon bang voor hun baan. En dat ook terecht, want mensen die met ons praten, die ja, verdwijnen.
Verdwijnen?
Ja, die hebben geen baan meer.
What will be the answer of the authorities?
Ik vind dat hun eigen verantwoordelijkheid.
Maar het gaat om publiek geld.
Ik vind dat hun eigen verantwoordelijkheid.
Het bedrijf waar ze bij in dienst waren. En toen kwam ik terecht bij inderdaad sites in Zweden, Frankrijk, problemen in Denemarken, in Duitsland. Toen bleek inderdaad dat dat bedrijf in heel Europa in op.
The truth about just one of the construction projects in a prosperous state. Investigative documentary, Down the Drain.
Semirichia, or Seven Rivers, is a region on the border between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, home to several ancient nomadic tribes.
1917 yılı Rusya'dan 16 yılı ülkünde bana oradaki kayın arkadaşlar kayıp duratmayı mı? Şu aydan kaçıp oturup tünümden yürüp oturup
Their parents had to find somewhere to run to. They had good reason to abandon their traditional homeland.
Целые такие картинки мифические рисовались, что они будут находиться между немецкими и русскими окопами, как вот некая такая живая мишень.
Сами киргизы, они предупреждали, что будет бунт.
Здесь две правды, и каждая правда страшная.
Somehow the people had to cope with severe hardship and still find a way to live side by side.
The European Union proclaims a democratic cause, but its real decisions don't always comply.
It is an ideology, it's an anti-government ideology, and it's deeply embedded in the construction of the Eurozone. It's also, if I may say so, not just an anti-government ideology, it's an anti-democratic ideology. It's a belief that actually you cannot trust democracies not to spend money.
The referendums have a meaning when their results don't fit the goal. This can be called a coup.
What happened in Ireland, Italy, Greece, I think one could easily call a silent coup d'etat.
È stato un vero e proprio colpo di Stato.
But not everyone is ready for this term.
I would not use the word coup. I would call it the way the system works.
In this Summer Solutions, we're talking about the escape solution. While for hundreds of years America has been a nation attracting immigrants from around the world, a new surprising trend is emerging in the past decade: the renunciation of American citizenship, which started as a trickle but continues to gather pace. Why are so many citizens seeking to escape their passport?
Breaking news on RT International. Munich police confirm that at least 9 people have been killed in a shopping center shooting and at least 16 injured. The suspected attacker, who killed himself, has been identified as an 18-year-old German citizen of Iranian origin. The city of Munich was on lockdown during the shooting, with a massive police operation launched to contain the attack.
Watching RT International live from Moscow, myself, Daniel Hawkins, and my colleague Sean Thomas here today with you.
All right, now Munich police confirmed that at least 9 people have been killed in a shopping center shooting and at least 16 injured. Video has emerged showing what appears to be the moment of the attack, and we must warn you that what we're about to show you is quite disturbing.
This video you can see shows a victim's body lying just outside the mall. Police say minors are among the casualties. A 10th body was also found by security forces belonging to the suspected attacker. He apparently committed suicide.
The suspect has now been identified by police. He appears to be an 18-year-old German citizen of Iranian origin. He had been living in Munich for a long time before Friday's attack.
Well, we spoke to some people who witnessed the actual shooting.
I live in a multiple-storied house. I heard 4 or 5 shots and shouting, and then another 4 or 5 shots. So I went to my balcony and saw someone on top of the garage with a gun shouting. And then I heard people screaming.
When I parked my car near the shopping centre I work at, I saw people running away from the building and then heard 5 shots.
We had police officers right down there on the shopping mall yelling up to the people who live here, the residents, to stay inside and get away from their balconies. On social media, they're telling us to stay inside, stay away from public places. They shut down all the public transport in the city and basically locked the city down so far.
Security analyst and former UK Army officer Charles Shoebridge says Germany should strengthen security measures in public spaces.
This is a shopping centre. People want to encourage footfall, people going into these shopping centres, and again, something that might deter that. The free movement of people would be overburdening security, for example, security checks at shopping centre entrances. And of course, in the West, in most countries, we're not used to having metal detector checks and so on at the entrances to shopping centres. And indeed, even if you did have, as recent attacks have shown, for example, the attacks at Turkey's Istanbul airport very recently, that even though there are security checkpoints, you simply displace the attack onto the queues waiting at those checkpoints. That's a very difficult phenomenon for security services and police to counter. We can go into some depth, of course, as to the reasons for the radicalisation of these people, if indeed that's what this incident turns out to be. And remember, you hand a victory to those that want to change society in this way, but also, as I've mentioned again and again, unfortunately, it's just a standard truism that if your intelligence systems fail to the extent that a would-be attacker gets through to his target, in other words, you haven't found out anything about that person beforehand, or the intelligence services, as has happened, of course, in the past, in the UK, the US and elsewhere, France as well, where they have known something about it and yet for different reasons done nothing about it in stopping that attack. If you do those, if you don't get that intelligence and act on it, then there's very little can be done in terms of physical security, particularly when it's a simple, soft target like this. And you have to imagine that there would have to be a very great increase in the number of terrorist attacks, I suspect, before this all-encompassing, very burdensome security would be accepted by society as a whole. We may have to look again at the whole issues of policy and how that's impacted upon the situation we're in respect of foreign policy, the destabilisation of countries such as Syria, Iraq, Libya, from which much of this terrorism has either emanated or been incubated. But that's perhaps a discussion for further down the line when we know more about this attacker.
All right, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, a massive security operation was launched in the city, bringing it basically to all but a standstill.
Munich is just under a 2 hours drive from Austria's border. The initial reports of up to 3 shooters at large prompted the Austrian authorities to step up border patrols. The security there was also increased by another of Germany's neighbours, the Czech Republic. RT's Peter Oliver has been following the developments closely that have taken place in Germany over the last 24 hours.
Well, right now we are really seeing the words of the Munich police force echoed in reality. They said that this was a cautious all clear, and as you can see behind me, things are pretty much normal. It's you know, the early hours of the morning here on a Saturday morning. Traffic is now moving freely. However, earlier on Saturday morning and late Friday evening, this whole area was on complete lockdown. Where I'm stood, there was a police officer holding an assault rifle. There was stopping all traffic from moving in one direction. The only cars that we were seeing on this side of the road over to my right had blue lights flashing. We're about 500 meters or so away from where the shopping mall is, where the shooting took place. The shopping mall itself is still obviously an active crime scene and is under extreme investigation and scrutiny and on lockdown itself. But that lockdown spread further away when, as we understood it, there may have been more shooters, that we thought there was a manhunt underway, or at least a potential manhunt. We've now heard from the police saying that the body they found around a kilometre away from the scene, as they understand it, is the body of the shooter, the lone shooter who carried out this attack. Now, we're starting to find out more about just who this person was. However, one thing we don't know is what their motive was. Police have released information saying he was an 18-year-old Iranian German citizen. But what we've heard from the scene videos that were taken on people's mobile phones appear to show him shouting a number of things, none of which gives us a real clear impression of just what his motive would have been. On Saturday, we're going to hear from the German Chancellor. She's going to be chairing a crisis meeting up in Berlin. Also, the Interior Minister is heading here to Munich, as we try and piece together exactly what was behind this attack, which has left 9 people dead, 10, including the man police believe was the sole shooter.
All right, let's now cross live to former CIA contractor Stephen Kelly. Stephen, thank you very much for being with us here on RT International. Unfortunately, again, under these types of circumstances. So if we get right down to it, after the main suspect was revealed to be a person with kind of a very unusual fingerprint, an 18-year-old German citizen of Iranian origin who was allegedly heard shouting racist and anti-migrant slurs. The police said that they're not sure if the motives behind the attack were linked to terrorism. Also, some people saying that he could have been a jihadist himself. What's your opinion on this potpourri of a suspect, if you will?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. As an observer and going by the reports of the people that witnessed the carnage, the aftermath, and the massive media, BBC, CNN, etc., my observations have at least 3 points. And the first point I'm going to say is, up to this point, I'm going to say this screams false flag. And I'd be happy to outline all of the reasons why I see this. But if you look at all the details of the event, the contradictions of the player that we're being presented with, this is so reminiscent of events that have taken place so close to me. San Bernardino, Orlando. It's always the same thing. It's the multiple shooters who turn into a single shooter, Dallas, even if you will. And then the same body that turns up out to be, police did not even witness the death of this person, but they've got a convenient body to pin this to, and suddenly becomes the motives of this lone individual as opposed to a much broader agenda of 3 shooters who are clearly coordinated and trained. And obviously this is going to be loaded on ISIS, but I don't think this is ISIS. This is not the Ankara airport where people shot until they were indeed shot themselves and then they blew themselves up. The shooters that get away are the ones that aren't the real ones, because the real ones go there to die. So that's what.
Well, and on one level, you bring up a good point about the fact that, ISIS would be of Sunni ideology, and if this is an Iranian-born German citizen, then that would be a Shia. That's a whole other contradiction. But if you don't mind, do you mind sticking around with us for a bit as we go through some of these grabs and clips and take you through the show. I'd be interested in getting some of your take on some of this. So just 2 days ago, the German Interior Minister warned about future attacks by radicalized individuals. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The entire EU, with Germany its focal point, is the target of international terrorism. Therefore, I've been saying for some time now that we're in a serious situation, and we have to expect attacks by small groups or radicalized lone operators in Germany.
So, very well aware of the fact that, you know, police can't be everywhere at every single moment, but many people on social media say that the German authorities should have prevented this massacre, should have been able to at least, in light of the recent axe attack on the train in Bavaria. They were aware that something like this could happen. Do you think that that's a fair assessment?
No, I think that's very inaccurate, and I think that the very fact that the clip that you just played mentions the EU as an entity would suggest this is a plot of the EU who's certainly under attack. And I think that the fact that the alleged shooter, allegedly mentioned Turks and allegedly started a fight with a Turkish person and a vanity-laced tirade against a Turk, allegedly, would suggest that this may have something to do with what I suspect now may be the very legitimate decision of Turkey to part with ISIS and become close with Russia. And I think that's very welcome, and I think that that's why the attacks on Turkey recently and the coup is possibly very real, and that this attack here is probably a stage event. Again, I'm going to suggest that if not the EU, we've got the CIA and Mossad. At the very least, I would say Mossad is heavily involved in this.
And Stephen, Daniel Hawkins here in the studio, co-hosting with Sean today. As we get to see the sort of aftermath of the attack, let's also just take a look at some footage from Munich there, where people, as you can see, being told to hold their hands up above their heads to pass by the police officers to lay on the ground. Similar scenes, of course, witnessed in Nice last week when people were escorted by those security services with their hands on their head after that lorry sped into crowds, killing scores of people. Just back to you now, Stephen. Manuel Valls hit some controversial notes, didn't he, with his statement that France would have to learn to live with fear that more innocent blood would be spilt. Do you think that constant fear of terrorism and indeed lone wolves attack, which are very hard to prevent, is that a new reality, as Val said, that Europeans just have to get used to living with?
I think that what we're seeing is an acceleration of the process necessary to implement a complete police state and utter fascism. So, and the fact that they're trying to start World War III very quickly and again create this EU/NATO army and all the downfalls that they've had recently with Syria and other fronts, I think that this is a reaction. I think that it's a last-ditch effort. I think it shows a lot of desperation on the parts of the dark side, and I think that as more of these events happen, it shows that we're winning the war.
So what kind of reaction do you anticipate now from European leaders after this latest attack?
I expect that the European leaders will treat the people like prisoners, and they will get them to do things like put their hands over their heads, which is something that they should never do. And I hate to say this, but I can't. I think here in the United States we have an armed society, and in many places there's no way that somebody could walk into a McDonald's bathroom, load a gun, and walk out and start shooting without expecting to be dead very soon.
Steve and Sean Thomas here again. And I have a feeling, I suspect, at least I know where you might go with this, but why would the police be so cautious with the details of this attack? I mean, so far we've gotten this mixed bag of information, but really they haven't given us much of anything. The actual scene of the crime is on lockdown right now, still an active crime scene as you would expect. But is there an ulterior motive as to why authorities aren't giving us more information?
There's a simple explanation, and that is whenever you've got a false flag situation like this and you've got a player such as the alleged shooter that is playing a role, they don't always act, well, they think they're playing roles that don't coincide with the actual role they're supposed to be playing. So this is why we have these contradictions in witness statements. But the biggest surprise of all for these players is that they end up being the dead body that's being pinned as the ISIS terrorist when they were actually working for a government organization seeking to implement these incredibly fascist Nazi police state strategies and policies within their countries. So I see a lockdown coming, and I see false flag events like this continuing until they achieve their lockdown. Europe is one story. The United States, we have an effort to disarm the public via occupation by the UN forces. So these are crazy times we're in, and ISIS will be the scapegoat for all this government activity designed to take away our freedoms.
And Stephen, you do mention there these policies that would be implemented by the government, the taking away of freedoms, civil liberties. There is a balance, isn't there, to be struck here between those freedoms that you mentioned, to not infringe on people's liberties, and to also keep people secure. That's a balance that's been debated hugely over the last days and weeks with these rising number of terror attacks. What, in your opinion, what steps should be taken to boost security in Europe that would keep people safe, while at the same time not moving away from those key European values?
Well, obviously in America we have some statements made by the Founding Fathers that are very, very appropriate at this time, but I'm going to talk about Europe right now, and I'm just going to suggest that assuming that your governments and the various leaders and Soros, etc., New World Order types stop performing false flags, if that all goes away and the fake ISIS goes away, if all of that went back to perfect, I would suggest that small things like concrete barriers and competent sentries at the barriers and simple things like that would be adequate. The all-pervasive social media spying is not an answer. Obviously, that is something that they want to agree to. They certainly means that the internet is going to be compromised. We already know that our phone and our computers and everything, that our cell phones are compromised. As far as the scam,
so what we know at this hour is that there was a shooting at the Olympia Einkaufszentrum. That's the Olympia shopping mall in the Muzach neighborhood of Munich. That's the northwestern part of Munich. And police have confirmed now that there are multiple injured. What they have not confirmed publicly, at least, are deaths. We do not know if anyone has died. They've been quite active on Twitter in the last 25 minutes, telling people
I really think they're trying to get us ready for World War